Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Clearinghouse on Women's Issues as we take on the topic of tracking inequality, current administrative policy changes, and women's work. First, I want to remind you, however, that today is a very special anniversary. It's on this day, 54 years ago, that Richard Nixon signed Title IX into law, declaring no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Now, the U.S. Department of Education has declared June to be the Title IX month, except that they have weaponized it by bringing a North Carolina school district to court for allowing a transgendered student to use the facilities that matched their identified gender. We have three great speakers who I will tell you about in a minute, but first I would like to give you a brief background into what led us to this topic. One big, beautiful bill, and I stumble on that every time I say it, proposed many changes to the Department of Education, including closing it. Two of those changes would particularly affect women in the workforce. First of all, the availability of funds for graduate studies in several fields heavily populated by women, and declaring several occupations that had been women's step up to the professions as now non-professions. These included nursing, physician assistant, physical therapists, audiologists, accountants, educators, and social workers. The reasoning for this declaration is that further studies were not necessary to enter the field of work, and the graduates would have to be supervised in their workplace. What this meant now for student economics is that for those jobs designated professions, the students would have a limit of $50,000 annually or $200,000 lifetime for government loans. And jobs now reclassified as not professional, those students have a lifetime cap of $100,000 and an annual limit of $20,500 a year. I have a chart, but you know what? I don't think I need to mess. I will put the chart with the recording and you can see it of how heavily women segregated most of these occupations are. By declaring these areas of study non-professional, students attempting to apply for funds would be turned down or told to find private sources, which, by the way, are far more expensive, as you might imagine, and less flexible in repayment structures. For years, students could borrow essentially unlimited funds to pay for graduate education, thanks to a program known as Grad Plus that capped loans at the actual cost of attendance for the entire program. Congress eliminated the Grad Plus program through the One Big Beautiful Bill, and now caps how much students can borrow from the government for graduate education. They also have limited the Parent Plus loans, which were previously uncapped and offered families a way to make up the gap between what the student could borrow and what could pay for the education. Such targeted devaluation and discrimination reinforce gender bias, affects immigration and staffing pipelines, limits advancement opportunity, and keeps entire sectors underfunded. The American Academy of Physician Associates and the Pennsylvania Education Association have filed suit against the Department of Education, as have 25 other states and the District of Columbia, challenging the Department of Education's Reimaging and Improving Student Education, or RISE, rule. More are sure to follow. These actions stirred a great deal of concern and anger in Sue and myself, as well as many other CWI members, and became the basis of choosing this topic. But before I forget, I want to remind CWI members you're invited to stay just a few minutes to vote on the new CWI slate of members that are going to be elected for this term, and that slate will be shared at the end. Please post any questions you have in the chat so that our speakers can get all the way through their stuff. And our first speaker will be Ariane Hegewisch, the Senior Research Fellow, Institute for Women's Policy Research, Inc. She'll be followed by Katie O'Connor, who is the Director of Federal Abortion Policy at the National Women's Law Center. And our final speaker will be Eleanor Smeal, the president of Feminist Majority, publisher of Ms. Magazine, and a past president of the National Organization for Women, which is meeting this weekend in Alexandria. Our speakers today come from varied and subject-rich backgrounds. Ariane will provide data on women's recent labor market experiences, including gender and racial wage gaps, labor force participation in employment, and changes in occupations. She will discuss how women's paid work is being impacted by federal policy changes made by the Trump administration, such as cuts in the federal workforce, attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the dismantling of federal oversight, enforcement of labor standards, and to point to some state-level initiatives that are, how did I do that? That are, where was I? Sorry, guys. And point to some state-level initiatives that are supporting women and men's access to good jobs. Lastly, she'll address the threats to the data infrastructure that allows us to track inequity and inequality and discrimination. Our next speaker, I will introduce as we have her. Go ahead, Ariane, and start off.
Thank you. Let me share my screen.
Yeah.
Great. And if I go on too long, just kind of interrupt me.
I would never tell you that.
Oh, no, please do. Actually, it's a plea. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this and to think through the last year, the longer going trends, some signs for hope, or, it's both expected and unexpected changes. Oops, let me see. I go. There. Sorry, I have to figure out. There we are. Okay, so what I thought I will do, because there are a lot of areas where to find impact, right? And so what I picked out was to look at the labor market trends in jobs overall, and just to say the labor market has clearly stabilized, including for Black women now, but of course, old inequalities very much continue. Then I want to briefly look at reproductive restrictions, because that clearly it's policies that precede this administration but have been intensified there, and that aren't always linked to whether women can or cannot participate in work equally or not. Then turn to the gender wage gap. Unsurprisingly, it's not narrowing, but on all these issues, we don't have last year's data yet. So it's just a little bit more what we expect, but also where trends have been going. Share a little bit of new data on student debt, and a lot of this work draws and my colleagues. And then at the end, just briefly, issue to note discuss how actually the job market probably last year has been much better than we expected. That's not a huge part of the presentation. We thought that tariffs would really lead to a recession, that a lot of the cutbacks in grants and infrastructure money would have a much bigger impact, and so far that hasn't really happened. And so what this slide just takes us back to is that women are now back up to 50%, slightly higher, of all jobs on payrolls. That is everybody with the W-2. And you can see this is the COVID time here. There were big gaps then. So women and men have recovered those jobs, and jobs have been growing as the workforce has been growing. This does not include people on independent contractors. And there's a slight overcount of women, because part-time workers may be counted by every employer who has part-time workers, so the same woman may be counted twice. So labor force participation is a little lower. However, I think it's important to note, we're back to where we were before COVID. and some more jobs added. Second thing, on the positive issues, we do a lot of work on women in construction, because that is one of the areas where women's participation is lowest, particularly in the middle skilled jobs. It's apprenticeship jobs, where you can enter good union jobs without needing to invest in a college degree. And we thought, and this was really an emphasis also under the Biden administration, to create fairer access, both for women of all backgrounds and for men of color. And what you can see is, if we go back to the Great Recession in year 2008, 2009, women really lost out a lot. And we expected that this would happen, but it has not happened. We are now in 2025, same low share, but same 365,000, actually is not that low, number of women working there. They haven't lost out proportionately, and they haven't lost out in absolute numbers. The whole industry has been a little bit, I think, in a freeze, kind of trying to figure out what's happening to the prior emphasis on infrastructure and climate change investments, but women haven't lost out. That is also the case if you look at all women working in construction, including professional jobs, secretaries, whatever, and their share of all payroll jobs in construction actually increased marginally. And Valerie Wilson from EPI looked specifically at Black women, and you can see that Black women during 2025 gained jobs, something like 20,000 jobs or so, so not a piddling amount. Now, where women have lost there is that in absolute numbers and proportionately as construction managers, and we don't quite know yet why this is happening. But overall, so far, much less change than we expected. Now, the next thing I would thought of sharing, again, a kind of picture of relative stability. This is the JOLTS survey, Jobs Opening and Labor Turnover Survey from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Again, here is COVID at the one end, lots of chaos. But really, if you look from 2025 or January, or this is 3 monthly, or April, more or less quite a lot of stability. This is missing May still, but in May you actually got a bit of an uptake. And so, jobs are continuing, no sign of a huge impact yet, and not huge recession, right, as people are saying. This now looks in greater detail. The other data aren't available by race and ethnicity, but here the data is the employment to population ratio, and I picked that because to see whether women are keeping their jobs to some extent and who's working. So labor force participation also counts everybody as unemployed. These data, they're collected monthly. The sample is not very good, so you get a lot of wiggling about. However, I think what's notable, firstly, the blue line here at the bottom is white women. And for white women, a kind of fairly stability, but then a downturn. And this gap is when the government was closed and the BLS couldn't collect any data. This is adults 20 years and older, which means it includes also the fact that white women have the oldest demographic, and so it goes up to 99 or 100, right? So it's women who actually may have wanted to retire and step back. And then the green line here is Latinas, and their numbers have really gone up in the, during this year. This is from December. And we don't quite know why. My gut feeling is partly it's inflation. Women, Latinas have relatively a very young population, relatively low labor force participation, but it may also be immigration attacks, right? So that those people who are still able to come out to work and be there, you kind of get a higher ratio of labor force participation. But then Black women, who we know have been really at the butt end of attacks in a lot of ways. This is from January, February 2025, when both when the attacks on the federal government started, or the cutbacks of federal government started, and also when the illegal DEI executive orders came out. And you can see that there was a really noticeable plunge in the number of women in the age group who kind of were working, right? And however, this has gone up now. And as I said, it's weekly, but you can also see that to some extent in unemployment, that things are stabilizing. However, these are people who are 20 years and older, so it does not really pick up the new generation of labor market entries who do have a lot of problems. So my colleagues, again, looked in greater detail in 2025 on job losses and changes in employment in broad occupational groups. And you can see that whether you look at professional occupations that typically not always need college education, but include lots of health service, nurses, doctors, lawyers, accountants, those type of occupation. You can see there Black women faced much larger job losses than all women. And men's employment in these jobs gained. Now, this may be occupational, maybe different states, but it's a really noticeable impact. And the same to some extent in service occupations. These are the lowest paid occupations. Again, the decline for Black women twice as high as it was for all women, and men gained. And altogether, estimates suggest that Black women lost 30%, 3 in 10 of their federal government jobs. And I'm sure, probably everybody is listening knows federal government had a disproportionate number of Black women because federal government had reasonably non-discriminatory policies and recruitment and promotion, and offered decent jobs. So you could get decent jobs with stability and benefits in the federal government, and a disproportionate number, a fairly high number of Black women worked there, but they were really cut by the attacks on the federal workforce. So that's on the labor market, it's just hit bits. So as I said, the labor market has stabilized. But this doesn't mean, of course, just because we don't have huge unemployment that we suddenly have equality. So basically the inequality that was there before, that is a kind of big theme through the labor market of the last decades, continues. And so unemployment for Black women is down, but it's down to the old ratio of being 1.6 times as high as white women's unemployment. And for Latina women, it's also down to 1.5 times as high as white women's unemployment. So, you can see the systematic differences that are happening there. And of course, the unemployment both during COVID and job losses last year, they have a long-term effect on the wealth and earnings of the collectively, individually on Black women, but also on their families, on everybody who is unemployment. So it kind of cements existing inequality. Now, the other issue that is much harder to pin down specifically is that inflation, the cost clearly is a factor of pushing everybody who can work into the labor market. And that may also be that labor force participation has stayed fairly high, so it may also be a reason for it. But that's we know that, but it's kind of harder to pin down. Same way that we cannot yet see whether the cuts in the cutbacks in SNAP and forcing people to seek jobs, whether that's going to make a real impact. To some extent, we know it's kind of hard to find those jobs, so it may not, but those we cannot capture yet, those trends. Okay, labor market. Now, reproductive rights and abortion restrictions. For the last few years, ever since we've done this, we've always done this to some extent, IWPR, trying to look at health and reproductive rights between states. But of course, since the attacks on reproductive rights, this have become even more central to impacts. And so our latest analysis of the impact on women's labor force participation and employment of abortion or reproductive right restrictions for 2025 is 140 or more than $140 billion nationally, which amounts to about 0.5 percentage points of GDP, so a huge impact. And our estimate is that it is around 325,000 fewer women who are at work because of this. And if women of all backgrounds are impacted by this, but the worst effect is on Black women. Almost 10% collectively of earnings are lost. And for white women, it's about a percentage point lower than that, altogether 8.5% of annual earnings. So it's a big effect, and this is calculated for women in reproductive age, so for 15 to 44-year-olds. These effects, of course, abortion restrictions vary widely between states. And so here you can see, we have a map which you can access on our website, which shows for each state what the estimated losses in terms of GDP, in terms of numbers, and in terms of job and labor force. But I think what's also noticeable, we see this, that even states that have very progressive laws have, support women, may have an impact because it kind of raise out the influence raise out whether you can find doctors who support you and how much extra demand it is, how easy it is to get help. So it is much worse in the states that are actively trying to restrict women's reproductive liberty and rights, but it is a kind of national effect. Okay, wage gap. Here, we do not know yet what the trends of the last year were. It's always, the headline figure is the earnings of full-time, year-round workers or people who work do any work during a year, and those data always lag behind. They're not out until September of this year. So we don't really have anything yet on the first year of the new administration. However, this is where we have been so far. And you can see the wage gap for full-time year-round workers was 80.9% in 2024, and it was 82.7% for weekly full-time workers. And for anybody with earners, which includes full-time workers or part-year workers, there has been more of a decline, but also not in recent years. And really what's noticeable, that both in 2023 compared to 2022, and then again in 2024 compared to 2023, the wage gap widened significantly, statistically significantly, and that's rare. So, it doesn't happen often. There's a change, but it isn't big enough to get to statistical significance. And what's happened is that women's earnings in real terms kept up. So they didn't have a decline in earnings, but men's earnings grew on top of inflation. And so the gap widened. In a way, we get such a gap. We often get when the economy is strong, and it's strong economy plus kind of still catching up from COVID. So strong economy means you negotiate. Men are better treated when they negotiate. It's so they can negotiate more higher increases. They get more overtime hours. They get more bonuses. And then on top of it, also more low-wage jobs came back. They say the leisure and restaurant sector is still lagging behind. And so, you add more lower-waged workers into the mix in fields where women are the majority of workers. So, and now taking the developments of since 2000 or 2002, right? The last 25 years, and thinking, are we getting any closer to anything resembling equal pay or pay equity? You can see that we are not. However, for American Indian and American Native women compared to white men, it's not, you can't even say it's generations away. That kind of point taking, just drawing a fairly similar linear line from using the last 20 years as a guide and then seeing where does it go. It's until 23,093, almost 20, the year 24,000, which is kind of very hard to imagine as far away as it is. And then for Latina women and Black women, also hardly any change. So what this means is they're not catching up. There's no real change, very flat line, even though everybody is getting more education and everybody is moving in the labor market. And to some extent, labor force participation is also increasing. So really crying out very loudly for policy changes to impact this kind of lack of progress. Okay, this is the most geeky slide, and I go through quickly. But what this does is to look at the impact of occupational segregation, which is high, but by comparing women's earnings, what this does, it looks as the impact of an increase, a 10% increase in the share of women in an occupation and the impact that has on the wage gap, right? And you can see, and does so over time. The black dot here in the middle is all women, or all workers, all women and all men, irrespective of education. And you can see it's gotten a little better, but not markedly, but you can see progress. And we have to do it decade by decade to be able to look at individual occupations, right? So, but then if you look, the green line is the jobs that do not require BA degree. And there you can see after some wiggling, that it's kind of, oh no, the black line is no college. The black line has gotten better. Sorry, green is everybody is fairly stable. The black point here, it's gotten better to some extent because things got worse for men in those occupations, right? It's not necessarily by women moving up, but kind of men seeing less wage growth. And then the biggest gaps and growing gaps are for jobs that require college education, which includes a lot of the professional jobs in healthcare and in education. So last data point is college debt. So taking a slightly different tack to the issue that Connie raised before in terms of access to limited access now to graduate degrees. But if you think about it, a lot of those professional and healthcare jobs where women are working, where they're concentrated, you kind of typically need a master's degree to step out of the door into decent pay, and that includes teachers, includes social workers. And you can see particularly, of course, in healthcare and so, nursing, what do you call them? Nurses with a doctorate, forget their names, or medical degrees, but this is also law degrees, accounting degrees, whatever professional further qualifications. And this is the mean debt, so it's not the median, but still enormously high and lower wages, meaning that it makes it much harder for women to catch up. But we know, wage gap or not, that without a graduate degree, you basically, you are without university or graduate degree, you are trapped in lower pay. So wage gap isn't the only thing that matters. Okay, so just to recap, in 2026, job growth is positive again, but it's difficult to assess the future, especially for new job market entrants. And I didn't put AI in there, right, which clearly has a dampening effect. It's probably not the current administration that is adding terribly much to that, but we're likely going to see some effect there. There is unexpected stability in some sectors, such as construction. And I do think that's important to think about because I do think there are some employers, some unions, some fields, where they know they need a diversified workforce, they have good experience, they want to continue this. And in any case, demographic means they need to replace the current generation of skilled workers. Now, the wage gap continues, and related policies, well, it's not a policy to the wage gap, but repro rights, student loan changes are likely to worsen, make it worse, or make women's access to good jobs worse. And then on top of that is the destruction of enforcement oversight and the attacks on diversity, equity, on inclusion will likely continue, and we don't quite know how they're going to bake themselves in. But we already know the OFCCP has been gutted in terms of oversight of employers and public contracts. The EOC has made huge cuts already on their regional offices, so enforcement is becoming more difficult. On top of that, they are cutting back the data collection that was set really important, benchmarks for both what is possible and what is very much below par, and they've stopped the data collection already in federal government. Federal government was always leading in terms of fair employment, and are now threatening in the next month or so, to announce in the Federal Register that they're going to cut back the EU collection for the EU1 forms and other forms that collected occupational data from employers at enterprise level. And those data have been collected for 60 years. So I'm just saying, because I do feel it's an important issue. It's an important issue for us at IWPR because we really believe in data, but it's important generally. Okay, now I assume that a lot of you know the positive sides, but states have and are making a lot of positive changes. So that's also part of the picture of, not all is doom and gloom, and there's some stability, and that includes unpaid leave. It includes minimum wage, which is very important to lift up low wage jobs where a lot of women are concentrated, includes childcare and states like New Mexico and Vermont, and also equal pay provisions and data collection on pay, such as California and Illinois and Minnesota. So that's my kind of racing through. Let me know. I put a lot of references in the large slide and questions and comments, and I just stop sharing now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was just almost too much information to take in. But I'm hoping
sorry.
Can we put your slides on with the recording? Oh, that's great. Okay, now we're going to turn to our next speaker, who's Katie O'Connor. She's the Director of Federal Abortion Policy at the National Women's Law Center. She has previous democracy experience at Demand Justice, the American Constitution Society, the Advancement Project, and one of my favorite places, the ACLU. Katie will examine health policies developing in the pronatalism movement. This is an interesting movement, folks. I hadn't realized this was happening, which will impede women from working to their best abilities or even at all, perhaps. Katie, it's all yours.
Thank you, Connie. I really appreciate you all inviting me to participate today in this program. As Ariane just sort of laid out, this administration is pursuing some policies that make it more difficult for women to participate equally in the workplace. But as I'm sure you all know, access to healthcare, including the full range of reproductive healthcare, is also essential to our ability to participate equally in the workforce. Restrictions on abortion and other reproductive healthcare limit workers' ability to advance in the workplace, expose workers to the risk of pregnancy discrimination and discrimination based on gender stereotypes, and subject workers to income loss or job loss, especially in low-paid jobs that are more likely to lack basic benefits like paid time off or control over our work schedules. And this administration has taken a lot of steps to limit access to reproductive health care. As a few examples, on his third day in office, the president pardoned 23 people who had been convicted of violating the FACE Act. This is a law that was meant to protect abortion clinics, clinic staff, and patients from violence and intimidation. And shortly after issuing the pardons of 23 people, the Department of Justice announced that it would no longer enforce the FACE Act to protect abortion providers at all. As the National Abortion Federation's Violence and Disruption Report shows, this abandonment of the FACE Act has already led to a significant increase in violence and threats against abortion clinics and providers, and it will ultimately make it harder for people to access care. The administration also withdrew guidance that reminded hospitals of their obligation under the Federal Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act to provide stabilizing care to anyone who's experiencing a medical emergency, even when that necessary stabilizing care is abortion care. The administration also dropped a lawsuit against the state of Idaho that sought to enforce this federal law in the state with one of the strictest abortion bans in the country. The administration's withdrawal of the guidance and its dropping of the Idaho case is contributing to the fear and confusion that so many providers and patients are experiencing in states with restrictive abortion laws. The administration has withheld tens of millions of dollars of Title X funding from hundreds of clinics that provide family planning services to low-income and uninsured people. Of course, the president signed last year's reconciliation package that kicked Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers out of the Medicaid program for a year. That led to the closure of over 20 health centers in just 6 months, and it led to drastic drops in the provision of contraception, breast exams, and other preventative care. The good news is that provision that kicked Planned Parenthood and other health centers out of Medicaid is about to expire, and we are hopeful that it doesn't get signed into law again for this upcoming year. A few other things: the Trump administration's FDA has announced a politically driven investigation into the safety of mifepristone. Mifepristone is one of the 2 medications that's now used in nearly 2/3 of all abortions in the United States. Mifepristone has a 25-year record of being incredibly safe and effective, and yet this administration is putting it to the test again for purely political reasons. The administration has launched investigations into every single state that requires abortion coverage in state-regulated health insurance plans, threatening to withhold critical federal funding from states that seek to expand access to abortion care. These investigations are ultimately part of what I call the president's revenge tour. He's using federal law to bully states that he views as adversaries, and he's threatening reproductive health care in the process. The administration has also used really dangerous language to talk about reproductive health care. Just last week, the administration issued a notice of funding opportunity for an embryo adoption awareness and services program. And in that notice, they defined frozen embryos as children, purporting to give frozen embryos the same benefits and rights that children get. This attempt to assign rights and benefits to embryos and fetuses is part of the anti-abortion movement's decade-long crusade to create a new legal pathway to ban abortion and restrict reproductive health care nationwide. These are just a few of the administration's attacks on reproductive health care. This country is in the midst of an abortion care crisis, in large part because President Trump promised to nominate Supreme Court justices who would overturn Roe versus Wade, and he followed through on that promise. And now, in his second term, the president is further contributing to this crisis through anti-reproductive health care policies like these. And these policies, just like anti-labor policies, keep women and all people with a capacity for pregnancy from building and exercising power in our society, in our democracy, and in our economy. But I do want to take a step back and talk about how these policies, both the attacks on reproductive rights and health, and the many other attacks on women in the workplace, are part of a broader agenda, essentially to push women out of society and back into the home. That is the agenda of the pronatalism movement. Pronatalism is the belief that our society, including our government, has a duty to encourage people to have more children. Pronatalism is arising right now because fertility rates are falling globally, including in the US. And to be fair, there are people who have genuine concerns about the economic and societal impact the declining birth rates will have on the country. But that's not what pronatalism is really about. Pronatalism is about exploiting that falling birth rate to impose a particular family structure and the gendered roles that go with it on all of us through official government policy. Pronatalism is built around and depends on a vision of the family that relies on fixed and narrowly defined gender roles, where it is a woman's job to stay home and have babies, and it is a man's job to work outside of the home to financially support the family. In order to impose that vision on everyone, the pronatalism movement is committed to stripping women of their bodily autonomy. As we all know, abortion and birth control are essential healthcare and are fundamental to our ability to control our bodies, our lives, and our futures. When people have access to the full range of healthcare, including birth control, abortion, and other pregnancy-related care, they are healthier and their families flourish. It's a lot easier to make the decision to become pregnant when you don't have to risk your life or health to do so, and when you're confident that you'll be able to take care of your child after it's born. Contraception and abortion are a critical part of this. Yet most pronatalists oppose abortion and, to an increasing extent, birth control. So pronatalists who claim to simply want people to have more babies oppose healthcare that makes it safer for people to have more babies. That's because abortion, birth control, and other reproductive health care give women autonomy over our bodies, our lives, and our lives. And that autonomy is antithetical to the control that the pronatalist movement wants to exercise over women. The pronatalist movement is rooted in other dangerous beliefs about women's role in the workplace and in society more broadly. The movement encourages women to have children earlier in life and more often, something they can only do by foregoing education and a career. And many of the leaders of the movement openly criticize women who work or who have career ambitions. This is where policies to push women out of the workplace fit in. The pronatalism movement is ultimately pushing for policies that give women no choice but to stay at home and have babies. Urging women to become mothers earlier and more often in their lives and requiring them to sacrifice education and careers to do so ultimately reduces women to their reproductive capacity. It also forces a lot of women to stay in unhappy and often unsafe marriages. These tactics don't help build healthy, sustainable families. They just build a system of control over women. It's worth noting, too, that many in the pronatalism movement also oppose same-sex marriage, single parenthood, no-fault divorce, and even IVF and other reproductive technologies, because these two don't fit into the narrow definition of family that most pronatalists are promoting. And they give women autonomy over their lives, including when and with whom to be married and when and how to have children. So the attacks that we're seeing on reproductive rights and health are part of this broader agenda to push women back into the home by denying us the rights and resources we need to exercise control over our lives. Attacks on policies that create gender equity in the workplace serve the same end. Luckily, these attacks are really unpopular. Abortion access is consistently supported by a commanding majority of Americans, and the pronatalism movement is not popular among the general public. So that's the good news, and I'll end there and happy to take questions after our last speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was a very good, succinct picture of what's going on. Thank you. Our last speaker is the well-known Eleanor Smeal. She's the president of Feminist Majority and also the publisher of Ms. Magazine. Her reputation goes, she was president of the National Organization for Women, I believe, when I joined. So thank you so much, Ellie. I'm turning it over to you because I know you've got more gems.
Well, thank you very much. We have so much data. Maybe I'll try to do this without precise data, but I just want to make a couple points. One is we have gained thresholds that we had never had before. And we here is women and girls. It would have been a terrible mistake if Title IX had passed and the girls would say, we don't want to play sports. We don't want to do this. That didn't happen. What happened was young girls wanted equality in sports. And I'm fixated on this because so did the public. They had been saying so day after day and poll after poll that they wanted equality. Yes, we are popular. And for the first time in these championship games that have been going on, both for males and for females, the crowds cheered. They were filled, for soccer, male, female, whatever. But basically, you saw a greeting, a thrill in the audience for the young girl who breaks another, status or makes you think, my gosh, all this happened because of Title IX. And one more important thing, maybe two or three more important things, they actually got sued in this part of the country, in Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania Equal Rights Amendment insisted that girls going to public schools, if the boys got $300,000 in sports, the girls got $300,000 of coaching and whatever goes into the spending. It's just amazing how not only did we take what laws were available, we did it in such a way that it was so popular. What would have happened, for example, if we'd opened the doors of the colleges and women had not walked in? When I went to college, women were 11% of the participation, 11% was female. Now, women are the majority of people going to college. So the doors open, and by golly, we were right. The public did want this. The polls had showed it over and over again. And I still think we are weak on of this is a major accomplishment. Not only did we change many, many laws at the state and local level, lawsuits, et cetera, we also had it right. Our people, young women, parents, families wanted more access, wanted more equality, wanted more job equity. Now, not only did we do it that way, I think we got to start getting more aggressive. This is just ridiculous that we do not recognize that discrimination injures not only the people who are discriminated against, but the whole society. And no matter what it is, we have found the best way for equality is when you break down a barrier, and by God, both the women and the African Americans and Latinos, everybody gains and wants it. That's the important thing too. So anyway, I wanted to make that point because I think we feel like we keep on hammering away and nothing happens. Well, a lot of things have happened. It's happened in sports. It's happened in academics. It's happened in participation. That's the reason why they went on so much this current administration in attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, who thought they would do that? But in reality, they're not going to get away with it, I believe. Now, another thing, though, I think our side has to do, not only enjoy the breakthrough, not only enjoy when the doors open. I think that another thing is we have to think in terms of who is really behind this. In other words, we keep on mentioning these nationalist, religious. They're not the majority of this population. Give me a break. We're now in a new century. They're not. Who benefits? What is holding that door, trying to keep on to yesterday? And I think we got to look at the enemy as very rich people, businesses. For example, we talk so much about wage gap. We should start talking about the benefits gap and what insurance companies benefit if things remain discriminatory. One of the things that happened, and we did it, we being about 6 organizations, pushed and pushed and pushed in the last in Obamacare to make sure there would not be sex discrimination in the Obamacare benefits. And it has helped. And that was, a tough road to go. There was about 6 organizations and God knows who else. But I think we have to know who is standing in the doorway and what money are they gaining, and who is the lobbyists who keep the votes so hard to get in Congress. When they know the polls are right, all they got to do is turn around and look at their own family. And they know that people want change. Why do they hang on to the past? Because indeed, the other side is handing out a lot of money. And it isn't just the traditional, somebody's rich and they tend to buy everything. It's a decision of these major corporations that they benefit more from discrimination. We have to show them that they can't get away with it anymore. And I believe that one of the most important things is that we have got to ourselves, who are we playing against? Is it just these lunatics that, I shouldn't use that language, are they just people who think we'll go to heaven faster by preaching something like this? I don't think so. In fact, I want to know who's paying the right-wing ministry. I think we studied so much our side and let them make it up, than really trying to identify who benefits and why and how can we change it. And I think I wanted to make my comments very short so that we could get some Q&A. But I do feel that one of the things is we act sometimes like it's us that need to be studied. No, it's them. And first of all, we got to know who it is. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a really interesting idea. I would like to pursue that again sometime. Okay. We now are open for questions. Is there anything that's come up? I haven't seen any in the chat.
I'll put in one of
Roberta Francis. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Ellie, go ahead.
Chat is disabled.
Chat is disabled. I didn't disable it.
That's what it says on mine.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, let me put you in line in the queue, and let's hear what Roberta has to say.
Well, first, Ellie, what you were going to add something at the end of what you said?
Oh, thank you. That's okay. What I was going to say is look at the wars. We're now in Iran. I mean, come on. Who's got an interest there but the oil companies? And they should have to prove that they're not part of this. In other words, it's the same thing with Afghanistan. They wanted to build an oil pipeline, and they would make more money, in my opinion, by having the Taliban, which created a dictatorship that they made more money for. I could go on and on. That isn't just good boys trying to be. I think I made the point, and I wanted to be more controversial. So, because we need ideas, and I do think that one of the ideas is we got to know who's opposed to us. Sorry.
Yep. And absolutely. I mean, I enjoyed all three presentations, but Ellie, you just, took the thoughts out of my head in so many ways. You say we have to be, be much more active. I wrote way back, in '88, I wrote a publication for the National League of Women Voters and had an interview with the 6 women who had been ERA chairs on the national board over the 10-year campaign. And one of them said she had been a league president in like the 50s. And she said, we had some old suffragists in our league who said we were just such wimps. We didn't chain ourselves to anything. And I got the feeling right now that you're not asking us to chain ourselves to something literally, but I do agree. It goes around, it comes around, and we've got to be more activists. And certainly you've set the model for that. I just want to answer, my answer to who it is a very broad concept, but I, again, bless Ms. Digital Ms. online, published something I wrote on the first day of Women's History Month, March 1st. And the whole gist of it was, I did a takeoff on James Carville's It's the Economy Stupid. I said, it's the patriarchy stupid. It is so broad, but we can all fit it all within a patriarchal power structure. And my point of that piece was to use the word much more. People say patriarchy, oh, what jargon, oh, stop it. No, I think it's really important for us to deconstruct that in every place you all are working and put it into terms that people understand, that it really talk about the gender gap. I just think we can do so much better at articulating who it is we're against. And I don't know any of it that doesn't fit into the template of patriarchy.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn to Terry Nicoletti now. Terry?
Thank you very much. Well, I'm old enough that Eleanor Smeal is one of my heroes from a long time ago. And I love when you caught yourself saying those lunatics, because I'm very clear. It's a personal passion of mine that we need to build bridges between those of us on the left, the blue folks, and the MAGA folks who were caught up in believing Trump. And I've seen so many, they're lunatics, they're stupid, they're this, they're that. And I'm getting to know that they're human beings who uh, are trying to feed their kids and be in their neighborhood. And they listen to Fox News, AM radio, and podcasters, podcasters on the conservative side, in part because the Democrats didn't show up with local candidates where they could talk and tell them about what we're doing. I want the Democrats to take some responsibility for how many people, good, decent people, the people I'm getting to meet, fell for the con, taking it back to the very, very wealthy people who engaged the evangelical preachers who got their communities. And I want to know if you think that makes sense, because I'm coming to it on my own. I'm not a scholar, but I'm coming to it on my own, just talking to people. And I want to know what you think.
Ellie?
Okay. Well, what you think is right, in my opinion. But the important thing is that we define it very, not just call names. I don't believe in that. I really think you should say exactly who's benefiting from this decision and who is not, and why have they organized against us. Someone told me that there's 9,000 to 10,000 lobbyists in Washington. Well, almost every major company has lobbyists. What are they lobbying for? Do they want this to be quietly eased out, attack us, but essentially keep out of sight? And I personally think that has to be, and I know from our work on gender apartheid in Afghanistan that the oil companies wanted to build a pipeline and they thought they could do it easier, et cetera. I can't go into the whole history with the Taliban, which is issuing all these horrible edicts against women. Well, those edicts have also appeared in Iran. And basically, is it just oil? What is it? But we should be defining it much more. And that's what you're saying. We don't need to be international, but I always like to put it in because it's clearer when you're looking for a distance. But every good athlete knows that it's not only their skills, but the skills of their opponents that they must deal with. And I think that we shouldn't call names, but we should define what their benefit is. Why do they do what they're doing?
Do we have any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you to our speakers who were each and every one of them individually wonderful. We learned a lot today. In fact, I'm still going to be processing this for a few days to come, I'm sure. Oh, France Giddings.
Hi. In the talk about funding for abortion services, there was mention that this funding was going to be coming up shortly. And I'm wondering, Katie, if you could give us more specifics about that.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
When you were talking about all the funding being cut, you said that was about to be renewed. And I'm wondering if you could give us specifics about that so that we could take action in that area.
Yeah, so the thing I was mentioning in particular, last year with the reconciliation package, that's the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. There was a provision included in that that cut Medicaid funding to Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers. But that provision was for 1 year only. And so luckily, we are about to see that provision expire. At that point, Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers who had been excluded from Medicaid for the year will be eligible to receive funding through Medicaid again. And so what we're really watching for is the appropriations process this year. And the Republicans are passing another reconciliation package, but right now it looks like they are not going to include that provision in either of those bills. So that is the good news. But I think moving forward, there are bad policy writers that are included in appropriations bills every year. I'll mention one in particular is the Hyde Amendment that prevents any federal funding from going towards abortion care. So people who receive their health care through Medicaid, for instance, don't get coverage for abortion care. That's the Hyde Amendment. It's included in appropriations every year. Obviously, with both chambers of Congress controlled by Republicans, that's not going to change this year, but in future years, we really need to push the Democratic Party to get rid of the Hyde Amendment and the Weldon Amendment, which is sort of part of the Hyde Amendment. So that is what I would ask from you in the future is, ask Democrats to pass an appropriations bill that doesn't include the Hyde Amendment or the Weldon Amendment, both of which impact and ultimately restrict access to abortion care.
Okay, Ariane, you're next.
Yeah, I'm seeing a question in the chat about what the most important data are that are being threatened by federal government, and then somebody else asks about threats to census. So firstly, the official data collection, census, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I think one issue that is kind of really important to us at IWPR is that all signs are that there's integrity to the data, right? It's not the administration has not been able and likely will not be able to actually change outcomes, just not report something or so. However, the problems that are happening, and they started under Biden, is that there's this belief you can do more over the telephone, and do we really need that many locations where people go in person? And so the sample of some of these is already small, and they're not really funding it properly to allow full data collection, but also particularly, on a lot of these issues like Native women, you can't get data. Asian women, it's really hard to get some of the breakdowns, right? So the samples are already fed, but I think our assessment or what we hear from people, we don't think that they are manipulated, they're just underfunded. And of course, the census already, or the American Community Survey, they've already cut questions, and sexual orientation isn't in there anymore. The kind of lesbian and gay marriage isn't in there anymore. So they're kind of trying to take away some issues that they try to kill also otherwise with policies. Now, I was also talking about the attacks on the Equal Opportunity Commission's data collection. And I really hope when this comes up, this will kind of come in a couple of weeks, that several organizations, I think, will put out sign-on letters. That is really, is really crucial to the Civil Rights Act, to Title VII, to then establish a way of monitoring and giving guidelines to employers also to check on themselves, so that you can identify discrimination, and ideally that employers also do self-policing, but it's a really important metric. And the current the Equal Opportunity Commission, the chair has announced that they want to rescind this. It will be in the Federal Register, and under the slightly absurd notion that data collection encourages discrimination or facilitates discrimination, and basically decisions, the collective data from employer cannot be shared with anybody who makes hiring decisions and so on. But also, they don't fully want to eliminate things because they still say white men face a lot of discrimination where there also isn't any proof. So the EOC data collection, I think, will kind of signal a huge change in the data infrastructure, the importance of taking seriously how and who you apply. So that's one thing to watch out for.
Okay. Susan Lendino. You have to unmute.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for these presentations. I just wanted to say that some of you may know that I'm an advocate in higher ed, and I stood up to Yale and won my case when they discriminated against young women who came forward who had been assaulted and harassed. And what I've been doing over the last 2 decades is helping others, stand up in higher ed. And as you may know, someone who's been discriminated against, retaliated against, and fired has almost no resources with which to stand up to the institution. So what I've been trying to do is close that gap by helping survivors put their documentation in order, because attorneys just don't have the time, they don't have the interest as much. Whereas if the survivor has someone in their corner, which I've served many times, to put the case together in a way that will gain an attorney's interest, we can get more strong cases in court and perhaps help with change. Recently, my advocacy has included federal employees who have been discriminated against and fired, of course, in addition to all those people who just left the federal government. But I've been having some success because, of course, I've had quite a bit of experience now. And I've helped a young woman get an attorney on contingency who works for DHS. And I will say that what is going on at the airports under DHS, you can just imagine what's going on with female employees and female employees of color. So I just wanted to offer that, if anyone has someone who needs help, that I think that this help can really make a difference in bringing things to court that will, help set precedent and help us win more. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any others? Let's see. Mary Pollock, we answered your question or no? Let's see. We have a Dem trifecta in the federal government, and Hyde's amendment was not removed during that time. It's not just the Dem trifecta that can solve these problems. The Dem party needs to be pressed to actually do these things ahead of what the campaign funders are demanding. Again, it's playing against the money there also. Okay, well, if that's all, I'm going to ask the CWI people to remain on the line, and the rest of you, thank you so much. This recording and the slides will be up on the website in a few days. Ariane, when you can, just email them to me, and Terry or Sherry will put them upside. So
Thank you
again.
Thank you.
Thank you.